Well, Kari, before my husband Brad and I got married, people would ask me this question. They would say, "How are you feeling about being a pastor's wife?" And it wasn't a bad question. It's a perfectly fine question, but it kind of carried with it a negative undertone. And so I would get worried because I would think, oh no, why are you asking me that question? And what do I have to be worried about? And I didn't have a good answer for them, obviously. I had not been a pastor's wife yet. And the years went by, and then I began to understand a little bit better why the question might be asked. Being a pastor's wife is a unique joy and a unique blessing, but it comes with unique challenges. I think you and I have spent, a lot of time with the pastors' wives around our church, the Orchard, and so we hear the ponderings of our hearts. We know that it's hard to know, how do I provide or encourage a space in my home, my family, my marriage that isn't solely about the church, right? Or questions about carrying our husband's burdens when we don't even know the particularities, nor should we, right? How do we help him carry those burdens when we don't know what they are exactly? How do we respond to our husband's heavy schedule with unity with him, with joy in our hearts, rather than feeling weighed down by it? So we all know these things. Does this resonate with you?
Oh, it definitely does. It does, because not only have I thought these things and wondered about them, but I've wondered about them because I don't feel like I've done it well often. Walking alongside of Tom or supporting him in ministry is a place I feel stuck sometimes, really stuck. So that is why it's important. This conversation we're going to have today, and it's an important conversation to have with a more seasoned pastor's wife, I think, someone who has been there, someone who has done that, someone who has walked faithfully with the Lord and her husband through ministry for many years. And we're excited to have our guest, Susan Yates, with us. She is just such a woman, and she has a heart for ministry wives, as she has been there. So she has joined us today to talk about our topic, supporting our husbands. How do we do that? What should our attitude be? We're just going to have a great conversation. Susan is married to John Yates, and they have been serving churches on the East Coast for 51 years. I love to hear someone's ministry journey and their story. And they've been so faithful to one church specifically for 40 years, she said. So that is just so precious to me. But Susan, thank you for being here. Welcome to Front Row Seat, conversations of encouragement for pastors' wives by pastors' wives. We're so happy to have you here.
Oh, this is pure joy for me. It's really going to be fun.
Good. Well, before we get started, would you tell us, what does ministry look like for you now? It's after 51 years. What does it look like for you? And tell us a little about your family before we get started.
Thanks so much. Well, my husband retired in 2019, and it was a jolt to the system at first, but we were exhausted, and we had no idea how exhausted we were after all those years in ministry. And then COVID hit. So it gave us a natural break just to sort of be quiet. But then we've picked up ministry again. Mainly I speak and write books, and I have a blog, and then my husband also speaks and preaches for different people. And we're, after a year away from our church, we are back, and we have a wonderful young senior pastor. And so you never retire from ministry. It just changes forms, really. We have 5 children and 21 grandchildren. So we have basically been able now to spend more time with the grandkids, which has been wonderful, because in those early years, he couldn't. He was booked, as you all know. So that's been a huge blessing. And we've served churches. We first started out in youth ministry. So I've been a youth pastor's wife, and that was in South Carolina. And then in the Pittsburgh area, he was associate for family ministries. And we built some small groups and young family ministries. And then we moved to Falls Church, Virginia, which is actually a Washington, D.C. suburb, where he's been the senior pastor for 40 years at the Falls Church Anglican.
Wow. Praise the Lord for that. 40 years. You do not hear that often. What a wonderful gift.
It has been.
Oh, a gift to your church and a gift to you both.
It's been a tremendous gift to us because God has brought us the most amazing people. I mean, they're our family. They're our community.
Absolutely. Wow. Wow. Well, and we're talking about being supportive pastors' wives today, supporting our husbands, and you have walked through many seasons of that, Susan. Everything from pre-children to raising 5 kids and then changing churches, changing roles. What can you give us just your thoughts on what does that mean to be a supportive pastor's wife? Maybe enlighten us with a story.
Well, I think, first of all, you never get it all together. You're always going to be blowing it because we're just sinful people. Yeah. And I think we have to remember, first of all, that we're married to a man. We're not married to a profession, though many times it feels like that. But our commitment is to our man. And God has called us together. And even if you were surprised by that call, you married him having no clue he was going into the ministry, we still have to fall back on the fact that we are trusting God. God called us together and he will provide. And one of my favorite scriptures is from 1 Thessalonians 5:24, which says, faithful is he who calls you. He will also bring it to pass. And so often we feel like, oh, I've got to make this happen. And we just can't. So we have to rely on the fact that he's called us and he will equip us. Yeah. And you go through different seasons when it's hard. We moved to Virginia when we had 5 children under the age of 7, and we were growing a tiny church. And I remember getting so frustrated because my husband was never at home. At least that's how it felt. And it was like he did church and I did family and everything else. But I was also very involved in church. I've always been involved in our ministry. And you can get to the place where you feel like you're just communicating about the functional, who should you have to potluck supper and who's going to pick up this or that or take the kids somewhere. And, oh, did you call your mother-in-law? And it's easy to have your communication resort to the functional instead of really sharing at a deeper level. So I remember getting quite ticked with my husband because I felt like we had lost some of that communication intimacy. And we have learned over the years that when there's an issue like communication, to set aside a time to talk about the issue. And you don't talk about the issue at bedtime because you're actually probably going to say something you'll later regret. So we set aside a time where we would just talk about the problem. And I remember saying, honey, I am frustrated at our lack of communication. And your life is busy. My life is busy. And this is a hard season. What can we do about it? And, gals, this was an important lesson for me because I think what we have to learn is we attack the problem and not the person. And in this season of life, the problem was our schedules and 5 little people and a big ministry. And so you bring your problem-solving skills, which often we use in the marketplace, but we forget to use them in marriage and family, on the table. It's not his problem. It's not my problem. It's our problem together. And we figure out, okay, given this season, given all the challenges, what can we do to take our communication to a deeper level? And we decided that when he hit the front door, when he usually has 5 little people there to want to play with him while I get supper, and then he was back out to another church meeting, we decided what we would do during this brief season was to take 20 minutes and have a cup of tea in the living room. And we told the kids they could be there, but they could not speak. Well, that lasted about one time. And we had to be very firm. We said, this is mom and daddy's time. You have to leave the room or you have to be quiet. And of course, they all left. But that was a time when we sort of tried to go below the surface And I had to learn to ask questions that call for more than a one-word answer. How was your day? Fine. That's what happens when you have a teenager as well, but it doesn't give you much information. And so I would say, honey, what was something encouraging that happened to you today? Or how did that make you feel? Or what's a challenge or a burden that's on your heart? And then he would ask similar questions of me. And then, it was very brief, but it enabled us to get back to going to a deeper way, a deeper, part of our hearts, which was what was needed. And it was really funny. A couple of days later, the girls were about 3 at the time. We have twin daughters. They're the youngest. And they came to me and said, Mommy, we want our cups in the bathtub. And I said, why? And they said, because we're going to have our tea talk in the tub. So, I think, that was a really good way for us during this season, just to take a short amount of time and go deeper. And that made a difference.
I'm wondering, did you go deeper in front of the kids? Like, did you feel like you were free to say what was encouraging or what was challenging during your day in front of your children?
I think you could, depending on the age of your kids. This we didn't, because we just really wanted 20 minutes without little people pulling on us.
Yeah.
But, as kids get older, I think dinner table is a great time to say, okay, what was a high for you today?
Yeah.
And have each person share. What was a low for you today? And have each person share. So I think we do have to work at going deeper in all of our conversations and training our kids to be good conversationalists.
Yeah.
That really is a learned skill, isn't it? It's something you have to practice, something you have to, even the practice of, I'm going to take time to be interested in someone else today and not just, you're through the door. Let me tell you everything that went on with me. I've done that poorly before, and to take time to listen is such a good advice. Thank you. Thank you for that. Susan, we want to do this well. We want to do this well. Everyone's different. Everyone's husband is different. Our situations are different. But would you say are there overall do's and don'ts in supporting our husbands? Is there everyone should do this? No one should do that. There are do's and don'ts that are pretty universal. Maybe, do you think that there are?
Oh, definitely. And I think the first thing really comes from Matthew 6:33. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these other things will be added unto it. And what that does for me, and this particularly relates to pastors' wives, but it generally relates to everybody, no matter who you're married to or if you're single. But we really need to nurture our own relationship with the Lord. If we want to support our husbands, they need to have the sense that they aren't the end all and be all for us in any way, because they can't be. So I think the most crucial thing is that I set aside time alone in the morning to have a quiet time in which I'm praying for my husband, I'm praying for my family, I'm in the scriptures. So that's really the most important thing in life, is that we're nurturing our own relationship with the Lord, because no man can meet all of your needs. That's just a fantasy. So that would be one thing. And in our time alone with the Lord, I think one of the main things we can do for our husbands is pray for them. And so I write down different things that I pray for my family each day. I have a little prayer notebook. But one of the things I pray for my husband is I pray for his time alone with the Lord, because it can be real easy in ministry for our husbands to neglect that own one-on-one time with the Lord and go straight to preparation, because they're always preparing a message, right? So I pray for his time alone with the Lord, that God will bless him. I pray that God will give him a couple of guy friends to whom he can be accountable. We women tend to know we need girlfriends, and I can talk about that in a bit, but the men maybe are not quite as aware of that need, but they desperately need other men in their life. And particular with all particularly with all the pastors that are falling by the wayside, a lot of that is because they don't have any accountable men in their life. Mm-hmm. So it's really important for our husbands to have one or two men who really know them, and us with the girls who know where they're tempted, know where they're hurting, know when they need encouragement. So that's something very specific to pray for your husband, that God will give him a couple of other men who will really encourage his heart.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So the do's of time in the Word, nurture your own relationship with the Lord,
right,
and pray for him. Pray for him, and pray in some of these specific ways are pretty universal. Pray for his time with the Lord, and pray for his friendships. I really appreciate that. Are there any don'ts?
Well, I have a funny don't, yeah, because I can be critical, which is the honest way, of my husband's sermons, and quick to tell him, well, it would have helped if you would have said this, or it would have helped if you would have clarified this, or you need a stronger application. So after a while, Johnny said to me, look, we're going to have a rule. You can't say anything about my sermon on a Sunday. Nothing unless it's a compliment. It has to wait until Monday. And then I've also had a little bit of time to process it and be more sensitive. So I would say, don't say anything to your man on a Sunday unless it's something really good. Mm. That's just a very practical don't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is practical. Really, we all want encouragement, and they worked hard to, write this sermon and prepare for the Sunday morning. That is wonderful. Yes. I definitely took time to tell him about the music when he was a music pastor. Something that bothered me about the music, because I thought that was helpful, so helpful. I'm not even very musical, so it just actually rang pretty false in his ears. Yeah. So don't say anything on Sundays.
Don't say anything on Sundays.
That's very practical. That is a wonderful practical don't. Any other don'ts?
I think we forget how sensitive they are, and the more we can praise them, the more they'll blossom. And I think that's very important. A fun, just little thing that I learned early on when I was sort of dripping with babies, and John would walk in at the end of the day, and my hair would be a mess, and I'd have on my spit up t-shirt. And I just wanted to prove to him that I had worked all day hard too, just as he had. And I finally realized, that's not a real way to honor him. I need to put on a clean t-shirt, put on some makeup, brush my hair. I need to be at the front door, and I need to have the kids at the front door, and we need to celebrate his homecoming. Yes. And so I just named that the importance of celebrating the greeting. Our husbands don't want to drag into the house and have a nagging wife or grumpy kids screaming. Mm-hmm. They need to be celebrated. And so I would say, think about the greeting and how you greet him and celebrate it, and train your kids to be there to celebrate him as well.
I love that.
That's really good.
I love that. I will think about that. It's important. I appreciate when someone says, hi, when I walk in the door. And yes. So that is wonderful practical wisdom. Thank you.
That's great. I still have a note.
It means leaving the laundry. It means leaving the dinner prep. It means racing to the front door when that person comes. And that overflows into training your kids when other people visit as well.
Right. That's really good. Now, I still have a note in my Bible that a dear friend wrote to me right before I got married, and I saved it, and it was to that effect. It was basically like, this really speaks volumes, not only to the Lord is it honoring, but to your husband. And yeah, I think I'm understanding that more and more, because it is such a temptation to want to be like, look at how horrible I look because I've been working my tail end off all day, Yeah. It's like, he typically doesn't come in the house like that. For me. So that's a really great point. Well, Susan, I shared the story at the beginning, when I was about to be newly married, and people would ask, how are you feeling about being a pastor's wife? And actually, Kari was really monumental in in preparing me for marriage. She and her husband, Tom, did our premarital counseling, and then Tom married us. So that was really sweet. But it is a great gift to have people speaking into your young marriage, and particularly as a pastor and his wife. So what advice or counsel would you give to a young pastor's wife who wants to create an atmosphere of honoring her husband in her home and supporting him?
Well, I think the best piece of advice we got right before we were married actually, again, relates to anybody, whether you're a pastor or not, but was to go out on a date once a week and make a commitment to do that for the rest of your life. And so we said, sure, that sounded really easy. And so when we were in seminary, we had no money, and we would go to get some dessert and then go for a walk, or go to a place like Home Depot and walk around and talk about what we'd get if we had any money. But it was a time of nurturing the friendship. It was not a time of talking about shop. And so I think setting aside a protected time like that, where you're just growing your friendship and having fun together. And in the beginning, it may be easy. It gets harder as your church grows, or as you move, or as you have a bunch of kids. I remember actually when we were getting ready to go out on a date, when we had all the little kids, Allison, our oldest, who was probably about 8, was saying the blessing at dinner as I fed the kids before we left. And she said, "Dear Jesus, please help the babysitter to be able to handle us." And so there was a season when I had to get 2 babysitters to handle them. But also I learned a lesson. Don't wait till you've got the kids all fed and bathed. Let the babysitter do that. You meet your husband somewhere, so he doesn't even come home, and go out from, say, 5 to 8. The nice thing about being married to pastors is usually there's flexibility in their schedules, which a lot of people don't have. Most people don't have. They have regular hours. But on your date night, meet him somewhere, go out, and then you can go home and go to bed. And the kids will all be in bed. So it took me several years to figure that out. But I think making a priority of your marriage is absolutely crucial. And because it's very hard when you're in ministry to do that, because you will always feel guilty. You know, I'm in ministry. He needs to go. I'm in ministry. And our whole life is about caring for our flock, which is wonderful, and it's a privilege. And that's something that I would say over and over again. We have to remember that being in ministry is a great privilege. It's an honor that we get to do this. But you do have to protect your marriage. And it's hardest when you have kids and, you know, all the different activities. But if you pour into your marriage during those really hard years, you will have the best time once you hit the empty nest. John and I are having the most fun we've ever had in our life right now.
Oh, I love
And
that.
so I just want to encourage you in that. But you do have to be really disciplined. And you know, that has to do with the day off. I think it's so important that we help our husbands protect their day off. And that means you educate your staff, you educate your congregation, whatever day off. I mean, for many of us, it's either Mondays or Fridays. And you have to let quietly the word out that this is my husband's day off, and have other people cover for him. And you're not available unless it's an emergency. And we 3 all know there will be many emergencies.
Yeah, there are.
But, and you have to be flexible with that, because again, it's part of our calling. But generally have him have a day off, and sometimes give him a day off away from the family. Let him go for a hike or a bike ride. And one of the things that my husband has always encouraged young pastors is you need to have a hobby. You need to have something other than church. So we have a friend who's a carpenter, and he loves to build things. He has a carpentry studio. Another who's a biker. My husband loves horses. So, you know, encourage your husband to have a hobby. And yes, spend time together on your day off, but just particularly guard it.
Yeah. Well, that's good. And that leads into something we really wanted to ask you, because I know Kristen and I have had conversations with each other and other pastors' wives where, some of our struggle in supporting our husbands is that, we really need to, our weekends just don't look like our neighbors' weekends. Our weekends are, if I sign the kids up for baseball, it's me taking them to baseball. It's Tom, Saturday night service and a Sunday morning service is what we do at our campus. But, he is working on Sunday. And we laugh when we consider the commandment, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy.
Yeah.
And what does that mean typically for other people is no work, rest. Well, then the pastor's the one who's breaking the commandment, because that is his work day. That is his work weekend. So how do we as wives help them remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy? How do we do that for them? Protect their worship, protect their rest. Or how do we communicate with them that we want to support them this way?
I think that's where it goes back to their day off.
Okay.
That is their Sabbath, and God understands that. I mean, Saturday night and Sunday, yes, that's worship, but it's really kind of worship / work.
Yeah.
And so it goes back to their day off, that you really help them protect that and encourage them to do what fills their cup. They sleep in, you get up with the kids. That might be something that happens. You go out to lunch, but you just protect their day off.
Yeah. No. Are you saying no honeydew lists? No anything?
I mean, well, I have not kept that no honeydew list, promise. But I would say just see it as their Sabbath. We just sort of change perspective. This is Daddy's Sabbath. And if you have some honeydew list, it just depends on your relationship with your husband.
Yeah.
My husband will say to me, Susan, you're an idea person, because I'm an idea person and a visionary. And he will say, no more ideas today.
Yeah. But he's being honest with you. And that's really life. That's really refreshing. Yeah. I found one of the hardest things is I get a little, I don't know if the expression is mama bear, because I know that more so pertains to our kids, but I get a little bit like mama bear when on the day off, he's getting communication about stuff. And I'm just like, don't do it.
Don't do it.
So what kind of on the same topic, but how would you advise us to support our husbands when they're trying to discern, okay, is this the situation where I do need to step in? Like God is calling me to be present. Or is this the situation where I have to say boundaries up?
Yeah.
I find that to be really hard.
It's hard. And that's where you need somebody on your staff to step in and be his protector on his day off and discern. Yeah. So I would say give someone that job who's on your staff on his day off, and have him put on his devices, hey, this is my day off. If it's an emergency call, so-and-so, the designated person. Yeah. But this is my day to spend time alone with the Lord and time with my family. Because not only is that protecting him, but that's modeling for your people. Because there's many folks out there who are also always on their devices and always on call and not spending time with their kids or their wife. Yeah. So if they see, oh, my pastor just turns his devices off or puts on a message that he's not available today, then, whoa, maybe I need to do that on a Saturday, to the lawyer who works 18 hours a day every day, or the businessman, or the whatever. So you're also modeling the importance of family.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, that's a good word. Have that person appointed.
Yeah, have a person appointed. Yeah. And they'll find you if there's an emergency.
For sure. Right. No, that's a good piece of wisdom. Yeah. And I think related to this is our hearts, because if I'm being totally honest, I really wrestle sometimes with feeling resentment or bitterness, even though I know that it's not right. And I want so badly to free up my husband for the work of ministry with joy in my heart. And yet that war is so real against selfishness, self-pity. So, how can we be alerted to that? Where can we turn when we see that resentment kind of taking root in our hearts? And how can we fight against it?
Oh, that's a great question. I love that question because I think we can all identify with it. I remember one particular morning after the kids were in school at this point, elementary school, young, and my husband was off again. And I remember curling up on my couch and trying to have a quiet time, being in the Word, praying. And all I kept thinking about was my husband and how I wish that he would do homework with the kids sometime. And that thing on the honeydew list I asked him to do a week ago, it's still not done. And I wondered, does he ever think about how I feel about what I do? And I wish he would appreciate X, Y, and Z. And the more I thought about him, the more critical I became. And I realized that I had fallen into what I call the picky trap. Pick, pick, pick. And what hit me was, Susan, what if he said, look, honey, you take the night off, I'll do all the homework. What if he had done that honeydew thing on the honeydew list right away? What if he had called me just in the middle of the day and said, hey, I appreciate your carpooling the kids all around town throughout the day? Then what? And I realized that I would have simply thought of something else that dissatisfied me. And that's just our sin nature, which says, satisfy me. And it was a wake-up call for me. And one of the practices that I began as a result of being caught in the picky trap, as I call it, was to ask the Lord to remind me every single day of one trait that I appreciated in my husband. Like my husband is a very stable man. He doesn't get real high or real down. He's just Mr. Stability. And I really respect that. Whatever it is about your husband that you respect, it may be that he takes care of all the machines, or he's techie, or he's a fixer, whatever it is, just ask the Lord to remind you of one thing every day and thank God for it. And occasionally tell him, don't say it every day because that becomes too canned, but I call that the vitamin, the marriage vitamin, is praising God for one trait that I appreciate in my husband. And that really helps us when we fall into the picky trap. But there's another thing that I'd love to mention that is just so crucial, and that is that we have a couple of girlfriends who really know us well. Like you two have each other, Kristen and Kari, which I love because we desperately need someone else who knows all of our junk, knows where we're tempted, knows our sadness, knows our strengths, who will encourage us, cry with us when we need it, but encourage us. I remember one time, one of my prayer partners who was from our church, my good friends have always been from my church. You have to select carefully, and that's probably a whole nother podcast. Where do pastors' wives find friends? There's a lot to say about that. But I remember going for a walk with Ann, my prayer partner, and I was mad with my husband on so many levels. And I just spewed. And she was wonderful because all she did was listen and say, I understand, and I understand. And finally, at the end of our conversation, she said, Susan, I need to ask you one question. She said, what are you doing to move closer to John? That just sort of got me. But basically, she called me out in a very loving way. And I realized, okay, Susan, you need to be taking the initiative to move closer to him. It's just a difficult season in life. So we need girlfriends with two motives, two goals in our lives and us in their lives. One is to always push us to Jesus. That's first and foremost. And second, to push us to our husbands. So girlfriends are crucial.
That's wonderful. I know that, we can do all we can to, search our own hearts for that resentment and that sin and confess it and try to make, our home and and our greeting of him, what something that honors him and everything. And yet still he is carrying heavy burdens sometimes, and he gets exhausted sometimes after weeks, years of ministry that are hard. What would you say to the pastor's wife who wants so desperately to support her husband, but he's hurting, he's depressed or discouraged, maybe over a long period of time? What is her hope?
Well, I think our husbands go through seasons just like we do that are difficult. But if you have a husband that is really discouraged and depressed, first of all, encourage him to meet with a counselor, if that's a good idea, or to find an older pastor in your location, or today with Zoom, you could meet with somebody online. But I think meeting with an older guy in person is really helpful. And of another denomination, just somebody who loves Jesus, who's further down the road. It's just somebody in a season ahead of you or 2 seasons ahead of you, because what they have is perspective. And you don't have perspective when you're, in a hard season and you're younger. And so they can give you perspective. There's also many places that a minister can go to a retreat center just to be encouraged. There's many of those today. So maybe he needs to get away for 5 days and just go to a place where he can be poured into, that is specifically geared to people in ministry. Those would be 2 things I'd say. Back to the hobby. He needs to have a hobby where he can just be off duty, which is important. Okay, and a really crazy one is have sex. Now that might sound a little off, but a man needs to know that he's desired, especially when he's having a hard time. And you may not feel like it, but you initiate it, kidnap him, go to a motel if you have to, send the kids away, attack him when he comes in the house. Here's the reason. Men are so different than we are. If we're having a hard day and a girlfriend's upset with us or one of the kids is in a crisis, that's kind of the last thing we're thinking about. As women, we just want our husbands to curl up on the couch with us and hug us and tell us it's going to be all right. But we're not likely thinking of, I want to make love. But a man, if he feels that affirms him and that says somebody desires me, I'm respected, I'm cared for. So I think don't underestimate the power of initiating lovemaking with your man.
Good
Now, I realize
word.
I'm saying that was sort of
Very supportive in that way.
there will be
you're his
women,
one and only, right?
One and only. But I say that I want to be sensitive that there will be women out there whose husbands aren't interested. And I understand that. And often that can be for medical reasons. And it's good to get a good physical and talk that through with the physician. But generally speaking, that can be just oh my, somebody desires me. Somebody respects me.
I know, we want that. We want him to feel that affirmation from us specifically in that way that only we can do for him. That is a real balm, kind of just a special part of a marriage. Do you, going back to something you said at the very beginning, that he cannot be everything for us.
Right.
That's what I hear you saying here, to the wife who is trying to desperately to support him and give him what he needs in not just the physical way, but just emotionally. But she to realize I'm not his savior.
That's right.
I'm not his savior. He has a savior, and it is Jesus.
It's so good.
That's a hard road. And I know there are wives who are walking that hard road with a husband who's exhausted. You yourself said that when he retired, you didn't realize how exhausted you were. Talk to us about that a little bit. How did you see that after he retired?
Well, we had a wonderful transition process. So our church has a great pattern for how you do this with a man who has been at the helm for 40 years. And we're bringing in a young guy who was 39, and he's wonderful. One of the things my husband and Sam signed a covenant, which they interviewed a lot of people. How do you do this well? Because you hear horror stories. Yeah. And we did not appear at the church for a full year in order to give Sam time to own it and our people to transition to Sam. And then we're back now serving just as Sam wants us to.
Great.
But when we first stepped aside, we had too many things booked right away. And because we had no idea how exhausted we were, we just were numb, and we should not have planned going and taking care of grandchildren and preaching somewhere else and traveling and speaking right away. So I would say if anybody is in this position where you are thinking about retirement, plan the first 3 weeks after you step aside to go somewhere alone, not with other people, where you can just crash, get out of your house, because people will find you if you're in your house, and go somewhere else, because you just need to sleep and be quiet. We get peopled out in ministry, and you just need time alone. And that was a big mistake we made, because we walked into all of these activities numb and were grumpy. And I think had we first had 3 weeks alone just to come down somewhere by ourselves. And one of the lovely things about being in ministry, there's so many blessings about being in ministry, but one of them is usually you have somebody in your church who has a second home somewhere that they will live.
Right.
And so ask for that. And that's really something we have learned. And just related to that, because I know most of our listeners aren't near retirement, but one of the mistakes that we made in terms of vacations was we would take a week here and a week there. And that really was not life-giving, because you go away, and especially if you have children, vacation doesn't mean rest. It means running a family camp. And so you have to change your expectations about vacation. So I would say take a minimum of 10 days, and probably 2 weeks is better, because the first couple of nights you're just coming down, and then you maybe have 2 days if you're taking a week, and then you're getting ready to go home. And you haven't really had that time. So I wish that someone would have told us, when you take your vacation, take a minimum of 2 weeks. And we have friends that take, usually in ministry, and I know it depends on the church, you get a month. And we have friends that take a whole month, and that's even better. We could never do that. But that's something that, again, I learned by making a mistake. We learned by making a mistake. Yeah. But I just want to encourage our listeners that you'll never get it all together. We think, well, one day I'll get there to that magical place where I walk with Jesus, I trust him, I don't worry, our marriage is totally in sync. But we'll never get there. In all honesty, as we grow, yes, it gets better because we learn how to fit together. I see marriage as sort of like a big jigsaw puzzle where, a 2,000 piece, where you're trying to learn how to fit all the pieces. And if you look at marriage like that, and you see God, the artist, has the final picture in his head, but we'll never get it completely finished this side of heaven. Yeah. So it's the process. It's growing in process. And so if you just realize, okay, we're just growing in the Lord, and we're growing in our marriage, and we're growing in our family, and make peace that you'll never get there, it will release the pressure. It's sort of like letting the air out of the balloon. And it'll enable you more to enjoy the season that you're in, rather than trying to get everything together. And what God wants, quite honestly, is for us to become more dependent on him, not less.
Right. Yeah. No, that made me think of, the verse that you shared, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. What is our primary pursuit? It's him. And if the hard times, the times when we fail, the times when we're sinners, if that pushes us toward him more, then praise be to God for his grace, right?
Praise be to God. Yes.
Oh, well, Susan, what a wealth of wisdom and practical advice that you have been to us today. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, it's been so much fun. I love your vision, and you're doing a great job.
Oh,
Thank you.
back at you, sister. Thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Well, Kari, that was so good. I will never turn down an opportunity to listen to someone who has been in ministry for over 50 years.
Right.
Teach us, sister.
Yes, please.
That was so good. She is so dear. Now, I personally loved that she and her husband made it a priority to carve out those 20 minutes most days of the week to be together.
Yeah.
How she got her kids to stay in the other room, I don't know.
Right.
I'll have to ask her that question another time. Give us the practicalities of that.
Yeah.
But I loved her point, right? Like you're not just functioning together. You're not just meeting together to solve a problem. You're here to connect with a person. You know, we're here to connect with our husbands. And so that may not look for us or for our listeners like 20 minutes uninterrupted, you know, before dinner. It might look very different. It could be on the date night. Loved that she emphasized that. But that really stood out to me as being important and an integral part of what it means to support our husbands.
Right. You know, I did too. And I think just for me, she was so joyful. She was so ready and interested in supporting her husband, but she was very clear on a do for every pastor's wife, how to support your husband. Spend time with the Lord. Spend time with the Lord. Nourish your own relationship with him. Do not be deceived. You cannot support your husband well if you are not spending time with the Lord. We can't do it on our own. And, you know, it's funny because when she said that, there have been times Tom has said to me, like, I feel like you should have talked to the Lord about that first before you talked to me, or something. Like he could tell. He can tell when I am running to him instead of running to the Lord. And that is truly a disservice to him. It's a burden on him. So that really stuck out to me. I was really thankful that she said that, because all of us can do that. All of us need to do that, no matter where we are or who we are as pastors' wives. And many different experiences we have with our husbands and supporting our husbands. But this one thing is important. Right. And to our sisters then in the front row seat, remember that. Remember, God sees you. He sees you, and he supports you. He gives you everything you need for life and godliness, including supporting your own husband in his ministry. Thanks for joining us today.